It's nice that you stopped by again. Come in, sit down with me. I'm very glad you're here. I'm a bit scattered today. To be honest, it's more than that. I'm quite upset. I had a very intense dream last night that has occupied me all day. May I tell you about it? In this dream, my father suddenly stood before me in the middle of the street, in broad daylight. He looked at me with very sad eyes, and I was so perplexed that I almost flinched. I wanted to say something, but my voice was paralyzed. I felt my mouth opening, forming words, but not a single sound came out. Suddenly, my father raised his index finger and gently placed it on my lips. At that moment, it felt as if a lightning bolt struck me, an electric shock coursing through my whole body, and suddenly, my voice was back, loud and clear. I heard myself say, "Where have you been for so long? I miss you, Dad." But he remained silent, his gaze fixed. "Where have you been all these years? Where have you been hiding, Dad? I've missed you so much." Still, he showed no emotion, just looked at me. "Where have you been, Dad?" I asked desperately. "Do you know how much I've missed you? Say something. Please talk to me, Dad." Yet his gaze remained utterly impenetrable and empty, as if he couldn't hear me, as if he couldn't understand me, as if my words didn't reach him at all. And then something very strange happened. My body began to shed its skin. Yes, you heard right. Like a snake, my skin slowly peeled off me and fell to the ground. It didn't hurt, but I felt enormous fear, and at the same time, a feeling of suffocation. Throughout this process, I heard myself scream for my father again, just his name, as loudly as I could, while I gasped for air. Screaming, I looked down at myself and saw my old skin lying around me, like a coat taken off a man and simply dropped. I looked at this old shell of myself and suddenly became very calm. I just stared at the ground and looked at my old self, like looking at a loved one on their deathbed saying goodbye. I gazed at this dying part of me and felt an enormous sadness rise within me. Tears just poured out of me. I stared at my old shell and felt the need to grab it, to hold on to it. But as I reached for it, it just sank into the ground and disappeared. Stunned, I lifted my head and looked again at my father, who still stood before me. He still looked at me, but his gaze was no longer empty and expressionless. No, his eyes suddenly had something kind about them, something friendly. His lips formed a gentle smile. Yes, he smiled at me. That was a nice feeling. Tears ran down my face, and at the same time, I too had to smile. Then he winked at me and took a few steps back, never taking his eyes off me. He grew smaller and smaller until he finally disappeared. The next moment, I woke up. Breathing heavily, I sat in bed and had to orient myself to where I was. Then I jumped up, threw the blanket around my shoulders, and paced through the apartment. I was quite agitated and confused, but also touched and inspired by what I had just experienced in my sleep. I immediately felt that this dream had a special meaning, that it was conveying an important and urgent message to me, but I didn't understand it yet. I had to calm down emotionally before I could think clearly. So I ran into the living room and crouched down on the big fluffy carpet there. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and let my breath calm down. Thoughts flashed through my mind. If I've learned anything in recent years, it's that our dreams are always facets of ourselves. That is to say, if you dream about your father, for example, it's not about your father per se, but about what your father represents in you. It's about the fatherly aspects within you, or about what you associate with your father. As I sat there on the carpet, a word suddenly came to me. Love. It's about love, I thought. A love I long for. A love I've always longed for. The love of my father. I don't know if I've ever told you this. My father was a highly sensitive man who couldn't cope with life at all. I suppose that's why he drank so much, to drown all the sorrow, because he was completely overwhelmed with the responsibility of being a father to 3 children, because he was overwhelmed with everything in life. My father was such a typical offspring of the war generation. He had never learned to talk about what moved him. He couldn't talk about what had happened to him as a child. Thus, he had no way to communicate. Instead, he drank. Yes, my father was an extremely quiet man who would rather reach for the next bottle than reveal anything about himself. When I was 12 years old, he disappeared and never showed up again. For many years, whole decades, I was angry at him. I was hurt and disappointed. I felt abandoned by him. Rightly so, because he had abandoned me. I had always been sure that he had never felt anything like love for me. But this dream I had last night showed me that there has been a transformation in me. I no longer feel anger nor disappointment. I feel sadness. Yes, that's it. It's sad when you have to grow up virtually without a father. And it's sad when a father is not able to take care of his children. Yes, when he's not even able to explain why he can't take care of them. How sad for the children who are left alone. And how sad for the man who can't be a father. And suddenly I understood it, the message of my dream. My father had loved me, even if he wasn't able to show it, even if he had run away from the responsibility. He had felt love for his son. Somewhere, deep down in his poor soul, there was love for me. But that was only half the message. The other, much more important half of this message was whether there was love or not, whether there was a father there or not. You can shed your old shell, because you are no longer the powerless child of back then. You can give yourself this love today as an adult. You can be a father to yourself, a mother to yourself, and give the little child in you, at least retrospectively, everything it needs. That's what my dream wanted to tell me. No matter what has happened to us, we all have the chance to lay down our old lives. We remain the person we are, who we have always been, but we no longer have to be ruled by the old limitations we once imposed on ourselves, that were imposed on us, back when we were still small and needy. We can lay all that aside, if we only dare to let go. Trust and believe. It helps. It heals the divine power